Okay, so let's make a start. Welcome to you joining us for this webinar, Migrating to ArcGIS Pro. This is part of our tech webinar series. I'm Robin Appleby. I'm joined today by my colleagues Tash Senior and Alistair Hind. We're all part of the technical enablement team here at Esri UK, and we're going to be walking you through why you should be considering moving to ArcGIS Pro, and also giving you an opportunity to ask lots of questions about that migration. So it's going to be quite an interactive session today. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be shared in the follow-up email so you can watch it back or share it with colleagues. The follow-up email will also include some of the links to the useful resources that we'll be sharing as we go through the session. And as I said, we do want this to be quite interactive, this session. So the first half or so will be a demonstration or a discussion around why to move to ArcGIS Pro, and then we'll be opening it up to questions. Now, we have had quite a few questions in advance, so we'll be covering those first, and then we'll deal with any other questions that come in throughout the session. So you can submit any questions at any time just using the chat function, and we will deal with these towards the end of the webinar, and we will also follow up with those questions in the follow-up email. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tash, who's going to explain a little bit more about ArcGIS Pro and why you should be looking to move to it.
Perfect, thanks Robin. So I always find it useful to understand the lifespans of ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro when we start to think about migrating. So ArcMap has been around since 1999, and we've just seen its last release of ArcMap 10.8.2. And as you probably already know, ArcMap has its companion apps, ArcCatalog, as well as ArcGlobe and ArcScene, which work together to provide this full spectrum of GIS capabilities. Whilst the release of ArcGIS Pro has all three of these apps baked into one to offer an all-in-one desktop application. So Pro was released back in 2015, and within the past 7 years, we've seen some major development and enhancements occurring, with the last release recently of Pro 3.0. So why should you migrate now rather than later? So ArcMap is supported until 2026, but from 2024, it will only offer technical support. And so there'll be no software updates and patches, and no ongoing development. Also, with relation to ArcGIS Enterprise, 10.9x will be the last series that supports publishing and consuming of services from ArcMap. So the latest release of Enterprise 11 is the first to only include the ArcGIS Pro based runtime. And a really valuable reason to migrate now is that you can run your apps in parallel. So you can run Pro on the same device as ArcMap to learn, plan and migrate at your own pace. So this can be really helpful to avoid losses or breaks to projects or data or workflows as you're migrating over. And also it provides faster geoprocessing. So you need the 64-bit architecture, which leverages the host machine's RAM to increase performance. So Robin will explain how to check your system requirements a little later. So what are the benefits to you as a customer? I'm going to run through these 4 benefits and dive into them a little bit more a little later. So Pro provides a really intuitive interface with easy accessibility to bundled up tools, panes and resources like the map ribbons or the command search. It offers great data management, so there's lots of methods to easily organize your data by, as default, organizing each new body of work into projects, which consist of your maps and scenes and data, all bundled up to access and share efficiently. So Pro offers some really neat realistic visualization techniques by having Scene and Globe baked into it already. So you can start to leverage smart mapping to advanced charting to even visualizing point clouds with millions of points. And lastly is integration, which can be powerful as it provides direct access to portal. So whether you're using ArcGIS Online or Enterprise, and this allows you to access, publish and edit data while still providing this one source of truth. And other types of integration include the Living Atlas and to the Autodesk world. So let's just take a dive a little bit more into each of these benefits. So first up, I'm going to run through the interface guided by these numbers here. So with number 1 here, we've got our ribbon. So this is along here, which displays and organizes particular tools or functionality into easily accessible core tabs on the left-hand side here. But we also have contextual tabs. So this is understanding the data that you're selecting and providing the correct functionality. So for example, if you had point clouds here, it would have all the tools necessary for analysis there. Number 2 is the project tab. So you can access app settings and configuration. And over at number 3 is the views. So you can have lots of different views, whether that's maps or local or global scenes. So you can easily switch between each one. And on the left-hand side, we have the contents pane. So this displays the map layers. And if we just look over here, you can it offers different views to check your layers. So whether it's the data connections or control on what's being edited or what has a label. And then number 5 here is showing that you can also see your attribute table. So being able to view tabular information alongside your map itself. And then on the right hand side is the catalog pane. So you may be familiar with that from Arc Catalog. So this is baked into one, but you can also bring this out into the catalog view, which is alike to Arc Catalog. So this can help to ease your migration across. And last but not least is the command search. So this allows you to easily find and open tools and commands, which I've definitely found to be very useful. I use ArcMap in the past at university, and sometimes you can spend a while figuring out where a specific tool is actually located. So also we've got a new learning resources page, which is a great addition to provide resources at your fingertips to upskill. So we've got quick start tutorials or discovery paths, and also some links to how you can actually migrate from ArcMap. So some great resources there. So next is data management. And upon opening Pro, you'll be asked to write in the name of your project. And what this does, it neatly packages all your files into one place on your local drive. So you can see here we've got the APRX, the project itself, but also the geodatabase. And you can go on and configure the settings for this. So here you could use a default project or project template. So this is something that you could use bespoke templates for your organization. So it could include preloaded layers and layouts. You could also define a custom location for your project, or whether it's a new default geodatabase or the same one itself. And then when opening Pro, you can see that it's neatly packaged into the catalog pane. So you've got your maps and data. You've also got your toolboxes here. So this can store any model builders, which you can actually import from ArcMap. So as mentioned, Pro offers great visualization. So in 2D, you can leverage smart mapping, which understands your data type and allows you to create on-the-fly heat maps, as you can see here. And you can gain great insight from your data through other enhancements like effects, dynamic clustering, or even starting to visualize your data over time itself. We also have a lot of great 3D visualization, so leveraging your scenes as a local or global view. So here you can visualize highly realistic representations. So that may include 3D meshes, IFC and Revit files to show floor-aware mapping of buildings or infrastructure, as well as 4D mapping with voxel animation. But there's also just a few kind of like great tools like 3D symbology to really provide engaging and insightful maps. And lastly is integration. So as I said earlier, it provides direct access to your portal, as you can see here. So here you can access your own content, your organizations or specific groups itself. And you can bring them into Pro to leverage some of the rich analytical tools, whilst it's the data is still hosted in your portal, providing this one source of truth. You can also enrich your projects by accessing the Living Atlas, which is our curated catalogue of content. So this can include anything from demographics to high resolution base maps. And here is just an example of a great workflow for sharing your data. So this is showing a scene of San Diego, which is bringing in Revit files from the Autodesk world. So this is using plugin integrations with BIM 360 and the ACC. And once you've gone and completed your work in Pro, you can share your web scene, as you can see here. So you can do this as map scenes or layers, and you can use this share ribbon here, which again just guides you through the process. And what you can see here on the right hand side is this web scene has now been published into our SaaS environment here, which makes it more performant, but also provides this one source of truth throughout. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was what you can do in Pro that ArcMap doesn't offer. So the first is just more enhanced geoprocessing tools like spatial statistics or providing data engineering views, which we can see here. So this allows you to look at the distribution of all your data layers. But there's also more capabilities for visualizing your project for stakeholders. So like in dynamic reports, multiple layouts and interactive charts to really understand your data. And if you're looking at big data, Pro has support for 3 cloud data warehouses. So Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery and Snowflake. So you can start taking in slices of your data into Pro. And also, if you're looking to leverage programming, Notebooks is integrated into Pro to write, document, and run Python code, whilst harnessing ArcPy and the API for Python. So now I'm going to pass you back on to Robin, who will hopefully begin to answer some of the questions that you submitted previously.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tash. So I guess one of the main questions that comes up with people migrating to Pro is around licensing. So I guess the first thing to say is that if you have an existing license for ArcGIS Desktop, so ArcMap, that's in maintenance, as part of that you have an entitlement to ArcGIS Pro. You may or may not be using that, but you have a license for it. And typically that will be in the form of what's called a named user license. So that's associated with either an ArcGIS Online or an ArcGIS Enterprise account. And essentially when you open up ArcGIS Pro, you will log into that portal and it will check out the license from there. And that's the kind of default way of licensing Pro and the extensions. But if you are used to using single-use licensing where the license is physically locked to a machine, or concurrent use licensing where the license is managed by a separate license manager and you can have maybe 3 simultaneous users, but the software is installed on many more machines, then you can switch the ArcGIS Pro license to that concurrent use but that's something you would need to do through My Esri. You can see the screenshots there at the bottom. So like I say, the default is that you'll be set up as a named user, but you can switch that across to a concurrent use license if you previously had a concurrent use license for ArcGIS Desktop. Regardless of which option you want to go with, the actual, I guess, setting up of that license is done directly within Pro. So within the project tab that Tash mentioned earlier, you can see in the middle of the screen there the licensing section, and at the bottom there you can say configure your licensing options, and you'll get the pane that you can then see on the right hand side where you set up either your connection to ArcGIS Online or Enterprise for your named user, or you set up the single use or concurrent use license. So a second question that came in advance was around what was known in ArcMap as data-driven pages, so the ability to automatically bulk create maps for a series of different locations. Typically this might be you've got a number of sites and you want to create a standard site map for each site, but you don't want to have to do that manually. You want to kind of set the template up once and then automatically generate all the images. Or as in the screenshot here, you want to create like an atlas where you have a set scale map for each of the different boxes that you can see on screen. Either way, these capabilities are possible in ArcGIS Pro. They're just named as map series now rather than data-driven maps. So you can see you can set up map series based on spatial geography. So in this case, these boxes, or it might be driven by attributes and jumping to different locations. And probably the best way to get familiar with how to set these up is to run through the tutorial that is there on screen, and I'll post the link through in a moment. If there's any functionality actually within Pro that you're interested in learning, it's always worth just searching for the name of the tool and tutorial or learn, and you'll be surprised how many different resources are out there to get you up and running. And then the third area that I wanted to cover that came in the questions in advance was around system requirements. It is fair to say that ArcGIS Pro has some higher system requirements than ArcMap. Primarily that's because it's a 64-bit application, so it needs to be a 64-bit machine. But because it can do things like 3D, then there are higher requirements around graphics card. So the link there will take you to a page that will literally detail all the different supported operating systems and the hardware and software requirements. But probably the easiest way to check is in the middle of that pane on the left, you can see it says check your computer's ability to run ArcGIS Pro. If you click that, it will then run this utility that you can see on the right hand side that will essentially run an analysis on your machine and tell you whether you meet this minimum specs or not. So that's a really quick and easy way of checking whether you are able to run Pro or not. And then finally, I know a lot of users make use of ArcGIS Pro in a Citrix environment. Make use of ArcGIS ArcMap in a Citrix environment, and it's just to reassure you that you can run Pro in a Citrix environment. Again, just because of the system requirements for Pro, there are some constraints around that Citrix environment. So again, the best place to look at is this help document that I've got on screen. Again, I'll put that link in the chat in a moment, and that will describe exactly what you need to set up to run it Pro in Citrix. And then Alistair, I think you're covering the next bit.
Yes, thank you, Robin. So one of the other questions that we had in was around managing ArcGIS Server and Portal with ArcGIS Pro. And there are some slight changes here. So when you log into ArcGIS Pro and you're connected to an enterprise portal, it will recognize that, and it will give you all the kind of options to interface directly with your portal that Tash was talking about. It does also then allow you to use, update and share both layers, maps, scenes and packages with your portal. And as part of doing that, if you're sharing a service, it actually does two things. It creates the underlying service, as you kind of be familiar with from doing it with the ArcMap, but it also creates a portal item for that layer, which holds some of the additional information around the way that you've configured it and configured things like the symbology and the pop-up behavior. If the server that you're connecting to is a federated server, then administration from ArcGIS Pro isn't supported, that you do your administration through the kind of portal interface rather than directly. If you connect to an ArcGIS server site that is unfederated, so effectively a standalone one, it's not you're not using enterprise portal, you can then, as well as publishing services, you can also carry out some administration. That's only supported at ArcGIS Server 10.6. And I guess the other thing to note, just while we're talking about ArcGIS Enterprise, is that there's also a change with ArcGIS Enterprise 11, which has just been released. No longer supports services published from ArcMap. So the underlying runtime technology in Enterprise has been updated to reflect Microsoft's latest .NET version. And as part of that, they've removed support for the ArcMap runtime in Enterprise. And so for ArcGIS Enterprise 11, kind of going forwards, then you have to have ArcGIS Pro to create new services. So I think there was one more thing that we're going to touch on before we go on to the open questions, and that was around learning resources. So we're going to send out a follow-up email to everyone, and that includes links to some good follow-ups. There's also, kind of conscious that within this we've not been able to sort of show you Pro in action. There's also a session from our AC back in May, which if you weren't there is worth watching. And then to kind of see some of the very latest things in Pro, the other thing to take a look at is the UC videos. So this took part last week in San Diego, and the videos for those are available. So we're now going to move over to any questions. If there's anything in particular you want us to try and cover off in the rest of the webinar, if you pop the questions in the chat.
I guess just while we're waiting for anybody to post any questions, just to share our own experience of migrating to Pro from ArcMap is that I guess initially it is a bit different. The functionality is the same, but the tools are perhaps in different places, and it can be a little bit of a barrier to kind of get up and running with it. The good thing is that you can run the two programs side by side on the same machine. I would say in practice it's probably best if you remove ArcMap if possible and force yourself to use Pro, because that'll speed up that transition process. And actually, once you get used to it, you'll find that you'll be just as quick, if not quicker, than you were using ArcMap. And the other thing is that I think Tash talked on this a little bit, is that ArcGIS Pro is very much the focus of development efforts. So there are new capabilities, new I guess functionality being added that will make life a little bit easier in Pro all the time. So you should find yourself being more efficient by using Pro in the long term.
And just to pick up on that, Robin, I think that's particularly true if you're already working and using ArcMap as a client for a kind of a wider deployment of ArcGIS using a portal. That Pro, the way that it integrates with the portal is kind of, I suppose, much more complete, and you kind of get direct access to all of your portal content from within Pro. So not only can you publish new services out through either online or enterprise, but you can also consume those directly in Pro and actually work with them as if you were working with a kind of a direct connection into a database or local data in a file geodatabase. So certainly I think that's kind of one of the sort of big benefits of Pro. And don't forget to look for the command search when you do start using Pro. That's was it introduced I think a couple of versions ago. I think it was around about 2.8, and that's a really, really handy tool for finding your way around the new interface. But certainly my experience was that once I switched to Pro, quite a lot of workflows were actually more direct. So things like adding a new layer and setting up symbology, I found that it actually involved a lot less kind of clicking, a lot less context menus, and was a much more direct experience.
Excellent. So it looks like people are either shy or we've answered all their questions, which is great if that's the case. If I just draw your attention, Ali Hughes, my colleague, has just posted into the chat a feedback form. It would be great if you could fill this in, just to make sure that when we create these webinars that we're meeting your needs and that we're covering the topics that you want us to cover. So if you do get a couple of moments just to fill that in, that'd be very much appreciated. Otherwise, as there are no more questions coming in, I guess we'll be drawing this webinar to a close. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope that was useful for you, and please do join us on our next webinar. Thank you.